In this project, we're going to be creating a custom public API. Right now, I am running it locally on my local machine, but I will later show you how you can combine that with a URL so that your friends or colleagues can use it to use your API. So the project is going to look like this. Right now, if we run it locally, we're going to get some data back, and we're just going to get the date and some sort of phrase back. If I refresh this, we might get a different phrase, and the time or date is going to update. We're also going to look at how we can add endpoints to add extra functionality. For example, we can say API/random, and if we tap on enter, we're going to get a random number in the range of 100. Plus we get some default text back, so we're getting a lot of information back that we can use for a project. We can also specify a number, so we can say something such as $number, and the number is going to be, let's say, 1000 or 10,005. If we tap on enter, it's now going to be the input for the random sequence. And we can also define some text, so we can say, and text equals hello world. And it's going to update it here. So we are effectively adding inputs to the API to get some responses back. So let's get started immediately with creating this bot in Python. And I'll increase the font size just a bit. And we're going to have to open up the terminal because we need to use a framework called Flask to actually create these endpoints. So pip install Flask. And then we can just close this console. Then from Flask, we're going to import Flask and request. Then from random, we're going to import random integer and choice. And finally, from date time, we're going to import date time to get the current date and time. Now our app name is going to be Flask __ name. So to create an endpoint, we need to use this decorator that says app.root, and we need to define the endpoint. So this will be the home page since we're just using a slash, and in general, I would call this one index. Just like when you're working with web development, you have an index page, which in general would be the home page. And all we're going to do in here is return a random phrase to the user, plus of course the current date. So phrases, list of string, and that's going to equal a choice from the following list of phrases. And I don't want to write out these phrases again because it's straightforward, but it's going to contain 3 different phrases. And actually we're going to remove choice from that. So as you can see, we have welcome to this page, you're looking good today, and the weather is great. Then we're going to return a dictionary, which is going to be passed to JSON. So here we're going to add phrase, and that's going to be equal to choice of phrases. So we're always going to return a random phrase to spice things up a bit. And the date is just going to be datetime.now. So that is the first endpoint we have. And you can actually play around with that immediately. You can say, if name is equal to main app.run. And if you tap on this green arrow, it's going to start a server or a development server in the console, which runs on your local host. So if you tap on that, you'll see that you'll get a response back immediately. And you can refresh the page to see that it's actually working as many times as you want. So that was the first endpoint we created, but we want to make it a bit more complex, so that you can actually create your own with more functionality. So we can close this for now, and here we're going to create another app root. So app root, and this time we're going to define the endpoint to be /API/random, and we're going to create this as random. Now this endpoint is going to be in charge of giving the user back a random number and whatever text they inserted. So here we'll type in number input, and that's going to equal request.arguments.get, and we want to get the argument of number, and that's going to be of type integer. So we want this to try to pass it to integer. Otherwise, we're also going to have a default of 100 in case they decide not to include it. So here we can type in also text input, so I can show you that you can also take text, and we'll type in request.arguments.get, and here we're just going to have text followed by the type, which should be of type string, and default, which will be set to default text in case the user enters nothing. If the number is an instance of integer, so number input is instance of integer, and all that does is check that number is of type int, then we can continue with returning data. Because if the user enters text where the number is supposed to be, that's not going to be of type integer, so we shouldn't allow the program to do any calculation. Then we can return that the input, whatever the user input, is the number input. The random is the random integer from 0 to number input. The text will be whatever text the user decides to input. And finally, we're going to include the date, which is datetime.now. And if it is not an instance of integer, we're just going to return error, please only enter numbers. So now we have our second endpoint. And if we tap on run again and go back to our development server, we can now experiment with that. We can do /API/random and tap on enter, and we're going to get back the response that we created. So input is by default 100 and text by default is default text. Otherwise, if we say $number equals potato, it's going to default to 100 because this did not pass to an integer. So it failed and gave us a default input. But in the off chance that you don't want that to happen, you can get rid of the default. So you can do this and you can rerun the program. And the next time you do that, you should get an error. So now you're effectively getting an error because the type you inserted was not correct. So this default is good if you want the user to be able to use your API no matter what text they enter, but it might be better to handle that with the error. So I'm going to remove that in this example, because if the user enters something and doesn't get an error, they're going to be confused why they got such a weird result. Like getting 100 for entering potato is not a common result. So raising an error is just a better scenario for that case. And we should also test. So that equals, let's say 100 and text equals hello. So text works as well. But how do we host this publicly? Well, we're going to be using a website called Python Anywhere. So the first thing we have to do is sign up for an account. And I'm just going to tap on login so that I can sign up here. Now we're going to create a beginner account because it's absolutely free. And I'm just going to quickly create an account. So I'm going to use this email here, and the username will be "this is for testing purposes." And then I'm going to make up my password, and I'm going to tap on I agree and register. Then I'm going to tap on end tour. And what you want to do is tap on web. Then we will add a new web app, and we're going to tap on next. And here you'll see that we can pick a web framework. So we'll tap on Flask. So the latest version they have here is 3.10, which means if you use any features from 3.11, it's not going to work. But we didn't use any features from 3.11 yet, so it's perfectly fine. We'll deal with 3.10 and we'll just tap on next. And it's going to give us a quick start Flask project, which is live and online. Then it's going to take you to this page. And as you can see, we have the website URL, and this is where we will host our API. But before we can see our API or actually use it, we're going to have to scroll down to the code section and go to the directory of it. Then you'll see we'll have a file called flaskapp.py, and in here we'll have the basic setup for a Flask application. But all we have to do is paste in our Flask application and remove the if name is equal to main check, because it's going to run it for us automatically. Then you can tap on save and you want to refresh the website. So here, tap on this refresh symbol. Then we can tap here and go back to web. And this time we can tap on this URL and we're going to have our API hosted on this URL here. And it's going to work exactly the same way as when we created it locally. So now we can do API/random, and that's going to equal, or we actually have to add the question mark and say number equals 100. And we'll get a response back for that. And text equals hello. And we'll get a response back for that as well. We will still get the error if we enter something it doesn't understand. It will say, please enter numbers only. So that is our API. It is live on Python Anywhere, but this will only stay live for 3 months if you don't click on this button within that time frame. So theoretically, you can have this up and running free forever as long as you remember to tap on this at least once every 3 months. It's going to extend the validity of this website by 3 months. So, I mean, that's not something too hard to remember if you want to play around with the free version. But let's copy our URL, or let's actually just go forward and copy our URL, because now we can actually use it in Python. We can get rid of this script since we're not using it anymore, and we can import requests, which we need to install, of course. So install package requests. Then we can do something very dirty. We can type in request equals requests.get, and we're going to get the data for our URL. Then the data is going to equal the request.json, and we're just going to print the data. So if we run that, we're going to get the response from our API. And this is super cool because now we can share this link with our friends and they can use it as well, of course. So your homework will be to make this much more interesting, create some dummy data for your API, create some more advanced functions so that you can actually share it with someone and they will be able to use that functionality just by using your endpoint or your URL.